What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to make a tier list because I could not find this topic anywhere. So with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and rank some of the NPCs of Resident Evil. That's right, I'm ranking the non-playable characters in Resident Evil based on which ones would be coolest to play as. So with that being said, I found 30 characters that are non-playable in the campaigns. So let's go ahead and start with some of the villains, and we're going to be starting with none other than Mother Miranda, who was obviously the final boss in RE8. They did include some characters in RE8 Mercenaries, so obviously we got to play as characters like Heisenberg and Lady D, but I just thought that it would have been a lot cooler if they also included Mother Miranda as a playable character in Mercenaries, just because she's obviously the final boss fight, and probably has some of the sickest moves. Maybe making Mother Miranda a playable character in Mercenaries was just too hard for them to program or something because her moves would have been way too OP. So with that being said, we'll move on to this next villain, and that is Dr. James Marcus. Dr. James Marcus is pretty much responsible for the Arkley Mountains incident, and also the Raccoon City incident, and pretty much just all the outbreaks in Resident Evil. Although, I would say that I did not really care for his character that much, and I think playing as him would not be that fun. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in the stay as an NPC category. Now, just like Mother Miranda, I think the Big Cheese would have been decent as a playable character if he ever became one, but seeing as they already made RE4 Remake and did not include him as a playable character in Mercenaries, I doubt that we'll ever get our hands on the Big Cheese as a playable character. Also, to play as a villain like Chief Mendez would be kind of random and just super unexpected, so all of this is kind of just like a big fantasy, like what-if scenario anyways. But moving on with this next one that I think they absolutely need to make as a playable character is none other than Hunnigan. She also reappears in RE6 as well, thanks to being the agent to Leon Kennedy and helping him with all of his missions, but she also appears in some of the CGI films, which are even Death Island and Vendetta, which were the more recent ones. Obviously, Hunnigan seems like one of the smartest characters in Resident Evil, and if she's also pretty skilled with handling weapons, then that's all she really needs to become a great playable character in the Resident Evil franchise. For this list, I tried to include some of the best STARS members that we obviously never got to play as, but I didn't want this list to be filled up with too many of those guys, so I kind of tried to include the best of the best. This one is Enrico. I think Enrico would have been decent as a playable character, just like most of these STARS members. I'm sure he was pretty good when it came to handling weapons and fighting off zombies, but he gets taken out in RE1 by, of course, what we know as some sort of traitor. And he even shows up a couple of times in RE0 to try and help out Rebecca Chambers here and there. So Enrico might have been a pretty decent STARS member to play as, seeing as he doesn't get killed off instantly like some of the other STARS members do. Which leads me on to this next entry, which is going to be Forrest from RE1. Forrest didn't even really make it that long in RE1, and as a matter of fact, we never even got to see him alive. So I think him being a playable character could have been a pretty fun potential thing that they could have done, just because I would have liked to have seen a flashback to Forrest and just to see how he got to that point. It would have been pretty cool too if we got to actually play as him up until his death, but I doubt that that's ever going to happen. This next entry is taking us to RE7, and with this character, I think he deserves to stay as an NPC, and that is of course Lucas Baker. Lucas Baker all around kind of seems like he would be a smart mastermind kind of character to play as, but he definitely doesn't give off the sense that he would be really strong in terms of fighting and high level action combat and stuff like that. I always say this when I see Lucas Baker, but he reminds me of Chop Top from Texas Chainsaw 2, but other than that, I would say it's pretty fitting to just leave him as an NPC. So now when it comes to Marguerite Baker, I would say that for her, she could have been a potential playable character, but when I say that, I'm of course thinking about Resident Evil Reverse. Now, they could have had some kind of fun backstory about Marguerite Baker in the DLC of RE7 in some shape or form, But other than that, I particularly look back at Resident Evil Reverse and remember that Jack Baker was a playable character. So I kind of imagine how cool it would be if Marguerite was also a playable character. But to be honest, she probably would have been just about as slow as Jack was. Now next is Tyrell from RE3, who I think could have been a fun playable character to be. I couldn't see really much opportunity to play as Tyrell in the OG RE3, but I think about RE3 Remake, and of course you cannot forget how short that game was, so if they wanted to make it a little bit longer and stretch it out, they could have had us play as Tyrell in some of the sections in the RPD or the hospital, because I think he also looks like one of those characters who would have been really smart and good with technology, and could have also handled weapons pretty well. So yeah, I think Tyrell could have been pretty fun, but moving on to this next one is going to be one that I think could have been a potential playable character, but not really. Anyways, that is Lisa Trevor. I'm trying to think how they could have actually made Lisa Trevor a playable character in any of the games, and I can't really put my hand onto how, but I do know that Lisa Trevor seems to have a pretty rich backstory. So I think a whole story just made up of her life and how she got to where she is would have been pretty interesting and fun. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys have played Resident Evil Code Veronica, but if you have, you would know that Rodrigo helped you tremendously throughout the game. With that being said, I think Rodrigo would have been an awesome playable character in Code Veronica, even if they just included him in battle mode. But in Code Veronica, they have you switch off between Claire, Steve, and even Chris Redfield eventually. So that would be cool if they made a remake and they made another playable character for us to use, which would be Rodrigo. Now this next entry is going to be taking us to RE5, and it is going to be Irving. Irving kind of seemed like an intelligent guy and everything before he mutated, and of course when he does mutate, he becomes a crazy giant water monster that obviously playing as would be pretty unique. All around, I don't really see it making much sense. Even though I'm a huge fan of RE5, I think he should stay as an NPC. There isn't really much else to say about Irving because he didn't serve much of a threat in RE5, so I'm glad they made Excella a playable character in Mercenaries instead of Irving. Moving on with this next entry is going to be Chief Irons from RE2. This guy all around just kind of seemed like a weirdo, and absolutely just a jerk and complete scum of the earth in RE2 Remake, so I couldn't really see anybody wishing that he was a playable character in RE2. My personal opinion is that he should stay as an NPC, and I am glad that when we got the Ghost Survivors DLC, we got to play as the other characters like Kendo, and of course the mayor's daughter. Okay, so now moving on to a character that I think could have actually been fun to play as, and that is Mike. I would have absolutely loved it if in RE4 Remake we got to play as Mike for a little bit in his chopper and just completely help Leon from above. I always thought moments in video games like that were really fun, where you get to just be in a chopper and just absolutely go off on everyone below you with missiles and turrets and all sorts of stuff. That is why I think my favorite section of RE6 is Ada's section during the T-Rex Simmons boss fight. But all around, I think Mike would have been fun to play as, despite the fact that we don't really know anything about his character. Next up is a pretty important character in the franchise that we never got to play as, and that is William Birkin. I think it would be sweet if we got like a spin-off game that was revolved around the Birkin family and we got a chance to play as William Birkin and kind of just see what he did and some of his ideas in the labs that also involved the characters like Albert Wesker and James Marcus. Other than that, I'm also kind of surprised that they didn't include him as a creature in Resident Evil Reverse, because I think some of his mutations could have been pretty cool. Okay, so this next one right here is Joseph Frost, who is also a STARS member, but he gets killed off right at the beginning before they even make it to the Spencer Mansion. He's also like the very first person who gets taken out in the Resident Evil franchise thanks to the zombie dogs. But I think it would have been pretty cool if we got a Ghost Survivors like DLC with Joseph Frost, that would have showed a different universe in which he survived and made it to the Spencer Mansion with everyone else. But seeing as they already remade RE1 back in 2002, I don't see us getting to play as Joseph Frost anytime soon. Now this next entry here is going to be Kirk from RE5, and I went ahead and put him as a character who should just stay as an NPC. Even though, like I said earlier, playing in a helicopter shooting down on all of the enemies is always really cool and badass feeling. And also, RE5 is indeed my favorite game in the franchise. But with all that being said, I don't think Kirk really gives much of a character or any worth as to becoming a playable character. Even though I do love his dialogue and everything, and he probably is a pretty skilled fighter, he definitely is not worthy of being a playable character. I feel like one day they will eventually remake RE5, but I don't think when that day comes that Kirk will become a playable character. Okay, so this next one here is definitely one of the most OP final bosses in a Resident Evil game, and that is Osmond Saddler. I went ahead and put Saddler up there at the top of the tier list as a character that I wish became a playable character. I mean, when it comes to the mercenaries, they included Hunk, they included Krauser, and they even included Wesker. So I don't see why they couldn't go as far as to even including Saddler. That's the only way I could see Saddler ever being included in a Resident Evil game as a playable character is through mercenaries, but same goes for this next villain in RE4, which was Salazar. Just like Saddler, I do wish that they included Salazar in the mercenaries. Even in the RE4 remake mercenaries, I think that would have been cool because he could have had a pretty decent berserker mode action, but then again, it wouldn't have been quite like what they could have done with Saddler. Next one that I also think could have been a fun character to play as would have been Alexia Ashford from Code Veronica. With Alexia Ashford, the only way I could see her becoming a playable character in Code Veronica Remake, if of course that happens, is if they show some kind of flashback of the Ashford family that includes a little bit of gameplay as well, as to just how they got so insane in the head. And then I would also like some more explaining as to how the cloning of Alexia and everything all worked out. But other than that, I would have also really liked to have had Alexia in that battle mode game. So now moving on to the next one, of course we have to follow up Alexia with Alfred. I think with him, he would have been just decent as a playable character, because he doesn't look nearly as skilled as Alexia would have been. Steve actually gets the best of Alfred on a couple of times in Code Veronica, so I really wouldn't rely on Alfred so much if I had to play as him as a playable character. And you also take his sniper rifle going into the Nosferatu fight, and it absolutely sucks, so I would not want to have to play with Alfred and that sniper rifle. Man, I do have a lot of respect for Doug, but just like the other ones, he does not really get to serve much of a purpose or have much character in Resident Evil, so I have to leave him in the stay as an NPC character. He does help get Josh and Jill out of there because of that helicopter, but of course that mission to get them out of there ends up getting him killed, and thanks to the helicopter that he flew to them, which happens to have 2 RPGs in it for some reason, he was able to supply all the needs given to Chris and Sheva to take out Albert Wesker. So that's why I have a lot of respect for Doug.
He was a brave soldier.
He was.
Now we've made it to the part of the tier list that is a little bit controversial. When it comes to this tier list, there's actually 2 characters in here that are technically considered playable characters, and that is Mikhail and Nikolai. I say that because they were playable characters in RE3 Mercenaries, but apart from these 2 characters, all the other ones in this tier list are definitely characters that we have never been able to play as, apart from mods and stuff like that. But Mikhail always seemed pretty badass, despite the fact that when we meet him he is already wounded, so with all those things being said, I think he could have been a fun and potential playable character, just due to the fact that it would have been nice to see his backstory a little bit more. This next one I think could be a decent playable character, and that is Annette Birkin, because like I said before, I would just like to see more backstory and lore from the Birkin family. It definitely feels like with the characters of William, Annette, and Sherry, there could definitely be some more explaining to do with their characters and their backstory. But at this rate, it is kind of looking like it is unlikely that we will get anything in the future that is related to the Birkin family. With that being said, we are going to move on to, in my opinion, one of the most underrated NPCs in the Resident Evil franchise, and that is Brad Vickers. He is solely responsible for saving all of you guys in Resident Evil 1, and he also plays a pretty crucial role in RE3. Well, not really. Just really up until the point he dies, I guess. It is really a shame that he got taken out by Nemesis so early in the game. He is one of my favorite STARS members of all time that we have never been able to play as. Now moving on to the last STARS member in this tier list, and that is Richard. I wasn't really too sure where to put him, because like most fans of Resident Evil, I don't really know too much about Richard. I do know that he definitely seemed to have some beef with Yawn because it seemed to get him pretty good, and we had to go on a little scavenger hunt for the serum and bring it back to him. And when we go on to fight Yawn ourselves, he comes in to try and get a little bit of revenge on it. Long story short, Yawn ends up taking out Richard, and in return leaving his assault shotgun, which we can go on to take and use for the remainder of our game, and I think it is probably the best shotgun in the game. That's about all I know of Richard, but regardless, I think it would be really fun to play more as all of the STARS members that we have not played as yet, especially Brad Vickers. This next entry is the other character that is technically playable just through RE3 Mercenaries, and that is Nikolai. I guess you also technically get to play as him in Resident Evil Resistance, but I could also be wrong to that because I've never played Resistance. That's why I said this one's kind of controversial, because I didn't want to disclude him and have only 29 or 28. I wanted to have 30, but yeah, you know, he's kind of technically a playable character. But I think it would be cool if in RE3 Remake or something, we got to see at the end of the game how Nikolai tried to escape Raccoon City before the bomb dropped. This next one I think would be one of the coolest characters that they could have included in either the OG RE4 Mercenaries or the remake of RE4 Mercenaries, and that is the Merchant. I would have also liked to have seen at the end of RE4 how the Merchant tried to escape that island before it blew up. But other than that, I think the Merchant could have been definitely the best character in the Mercenaries mode. They could have just stacked him up with the most OP loot and everything, and I think he would have been one of the funnest characters in the world. Next up on the tier list is one of my personal favorite NPCs in Resident Evil, and that is Marvin. I'm not so familiar with RE Outbreak, but I am aware that he is included in that one. And in Outbreak, he is included a little bit more before he even gets bit, or meets up with Claire and Leon and all that stuff, which is all things that I wish was included more in the actual RE2 campaign. I also wish that when they made RE2 Remake that they included Marvin as a Ghost Survivor story. They could have gave him a story where in a different universe he had to travel down to the lab and find the vaccine for the bite before he turned into a zombie. That would have been really cool to play as him through those moments. I think I definitely saved the best for last here when it comes to Resident Evil NPCs, and that is Oswald Spencer. He is the father of Albert Wesker, and I think he is the ultimate villain that we never got to see become the ultimate villain in the Resident Evil franchise. All we get to see from him is him in his older stages before he gets killed off by, of course, his son Albert Wesker. But I would really like to see where they could go with Spencer if they ever decided to use his character in a future Resident Evil game. I've been seeing a lot of speculation that the mysterious villain in the trailers of RE9 could very well be Spencer, and as much as it kind of looks like it could be Spencer, I just don't see it being likely because we already saw that he got killed off by Wesker very many years ago. But that is it for everything. That is all my entries, and before I get out of here, I'm going to review my tier list from top to bottom so you guys can see if you agree or disagree with this tier list. So at the top, for the characters that I wish became playable characters, are Spencer, Brad Vickers, Hunnigan, Marvin, Rodrigo, and Sadler. Now at the characters that I think could have just been fun characters to play as are Alexia, the Merchant, Tyrell, Enrico, and Mike. Now for the ones that could have been just decent playable characters are William Birkin, Salazar, the Big Cheese, Mother Miranda, Nikolai, Alfred, and Annette Birkin. And for the ones that I think could have been potential playable characters are Lisa Trevor, Mikhail, Richard, Forrest, Marguerite Baker, and Joseph Frost. And lastly, for the ones that should stay as an NPC are Irving, Kirk, Doug, James Marcus, Lucas Baker, and Chief Irons. So go ahead and leave a like and let me know what you guys thought about this tier list down below in the comments. And also, if you're watching this within the first week that it's uploaded, please consider dropping some hype points on this video as it helps me reach a wider audience. I also made this public on the TierMaker app, so feel free to use this tier list for yourselves if you guys want to make your own tier list, and of course comment down below what you guys put as your favorite NPCs. Me personally, I don't care if he's going to be a playable character or not, but I want to see more from Spencer, hopefully in RE9. But that's about it, guys. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you all in the next video tomorrow. Peace.